Welcome to Andy Staples on 3. It is a Dear Andy show. Your questions will drive the show. And yeah, you got questions about Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, living rent-free in all of our heads. Or we just like talking about him. I think that's probably what it is. I think that's probably the entire point of all this. But Coach Prime, again, the subject of national discourse. And it was the subject of most of the questions that I got for Dear Andy. And that's just how this goes right now. Anytime Coach Prime does anything, it is interesting to people. And that is, again, pretty much the point of the whole thing. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We'll also answer a question about which programs are supposed to win the national title. I don't mean that they have everything they need, that they're the favorites to win the national title this year. I mean, which fan bases think their coach's job is to win the national title, whether that is an actual real possibility or not, because it does change how these coaches get judged. It does change their relationship with the job and the school. And it's a very interesting question. And it's one of those that I love it when you guys are watching, notice the things that I say over and over again, and then ask me to explain them, because sometimes I forget that I say these things over and over and over again because I've always believed them or I've always noticed them, but maybe I haven't sat down and explained that to everybody yet. Or maybe you're new to the show and you're wondering, why the hell does he keep saying the Auburn coach's job is to win the national title? I get a chance to explain that. We got a couple things to talk about before that. One, something coming out of Phoenix this week. Now, what's going on in Phoenix this week used to be called the Fiesta Frolic. I can't remember what they're exactly calling it these days, but it used to be a lot bigger gathering of, you would have the Big Ten there, you'd have the Big 12, you'd have the Pac-12, you'd have the Mountain West, the American Athletic Conference. They'd have their meetings at the end of the week. The Fiesta Bowl would put on this big shindig, and there'd be golf, and there's like a Nike gift suite. And it was basically schools getting greased by the bowl, getting greased by the best bowl to ever grease all of the schools. And so a lot of stuff would happen. A lot of moving and shaking would go on there. It's not as big of an event as it used to be because of conference realignment. But interesting nuggets do come out of it sometimes. And Nick Carparelli, the head of bowl season, Nick is basically the guy in charge of the group that lobbies in favor of the bowl games. He talked to Ross Dellinger from Yahoo this week, and interesting comments about ending opt-outs in bowl games. And it's just one of those strange bedfellow situations, because the bowls for the longest time were the ones that were kind of trying to stop progress in college football. They didn't want the playoff because they didn't want what would happen to the bowls, because they had a nice little grift going and they're trying to keep their hustle alive. Well, now they've still got their grift going. The bowls didn't die, believe it or not, because people like watching football, but they have these opt-outs. How do you solve it? Well, Nick Carparelli talked to Ross Dellinger about how you solve that. And he had a meeting with Charlie Baker, the new NCAA president, recently. So on the national level, what needs to happen for everybody is collectives need to be brought in-house and universities need to manage that. I think what will come with that is we'll see agreements, much like any other employment agreement between athletes and the university now, compensating them, whether it's employees, whether it's an employee-employer relationship or inducement contractors. And when we see these binding agreements with their student athletes, you're going to see student athletes that are required to play in the 12 regular season games, the bowl game, and the CFP as part of their compensation, not unlike how the rest of the real world works. That is a very common sense statement from Nick Carparelli. The only problem is all the university presidents go, no, stop. You can't say employees. But yes, that would solve the Bulls' problems. And it's funny how the Bulls, which marched in lockstep with these guys when they were trying to halt the progress on a college football playoff, which is something people wanted to watch and something the ratings show us they like better. It's funny how now They're diametrically opposed to what your average university president, because your average university president does not want employment. They're going to get it. They're going to have to deal with it, but they don't want it. But now it's funny to see the people from the Bulls saying that now. Oh, no, you got to make them employees, guys. You got to keep our little hustle going. I love this sport. I do. I love how nobody has any real principles in it. They just sort of flip from whatever keeps their thing going to the next thing. And what was sacred yesterday is meaningless today. It's hilarious. But yeah, it would make sense. It would make a lot of sense. Put it in the contract. You're playing this game or we don't pay you the full amount. It's fair. Perfectly fair. But you're going to have to admit that they're employees or independent contractors or look, I honestly don't care whether you're giving them a W-2 or a 1099. But you're going to have to figure that out. I love complaining season. That's the fun things about these spring meetings is that's really what they get together and they complain about rules and they complain about changes to the rules. But this is especially funny because now you kind of see where everybody stakes their ground because they're saying, I need to make sure my thing still exists. And you're going to see a lot of that because a lot of the pushback against employment is it's more expensive. And there are people in athletic departments who make six-figure salaries who don't actually do anything. They'll be the first ones gone. And that's why they don't want employees. They don't want the athletes as employees. So it is an interesting push-pull right now because everybody's trying to protect their corners, but everybody knows what's coming. In this case, what's coming is going to help the Bulls. It's not going to help your friendly neighborhood six-figure associate AD whose job title is very nebulous. So don't worry, stay tuned. It'll change again tomorrow. All right. Before we get to Dear Andy, we have something very exciting. We have a new vertical add-on 3. What's a vertical? It's internet term for a section of a website. Our new one's called Her, and it's going to focus on women's basketball. Yeah, we were paying attention to how much you guys were paying attention. We saw what you were watching. We saw when we talked about it, the comments lit up. It's definitely a moment for women's basketball, and I don't think it's changing. I think it's going to keep growing. And so we've launched a vertical called Her. The person who you will see the most in that vertical is Talia Goodman, who is a rising star in this business. So we decided to bring Talia on. Her first day was Wednesday, and we are very excited to have her. So here is Talia Goodman from On3's Her. We welcome the newest member of the On3 family, Talia Goodman.
Thank you.
We got a new vertical. It's called Her. Talia, what you've been incredibly busy. So for those who don't know, you've been reporting on women's basketball for quite some time. This portal season, have you had even a second to breathe?
No, I definitely haven't. I've been up the late hours of the night when Kiki Iriafen entered. I think it was a 10 p.m. night, which rarely happens. And, commitments through the weekend. It's just there's no sleeping right now. There are some of the biggest names in the country on the board still. Some of them are still up there. And it's just there's no sleep during, portal season.
So Friday, which is really because the grad transfers can put in their paperwork up to Wednesday night that the school is 48 hours. It's like Friday when the clock hits midnight to become Saturday. Do you pop a celebratory beverage like
So I'm going home, so I'll be sleeping. That will be my time to finally sleep.
So What brought you to On3? We started this her vertical, which you'll be writing a lot about women's basketball, and right now it has never been hotter and never been a more valuable property in terms of eyeballs, people watching, people wanting to learn about the game. But what brought you here?
I mean, obviously, I love what you guys do within the college landscape, and I was excited to come join. Obviously, a lot of the recruiting stuff is what I think women's basketball needs more interest in, right? I think there's not a lot out there. ESPN has their kind of top rankings, but there's nothing like the database that you guys have for men's sports. And so I was excited to get on board with that and start doing some features, doing some pieces for you.
Well, and that's what I think is the most interesting thing about what's happened in the past year or so, especially with the way, not just the way the game gets covered, but the way the game gets talked about. And it was funny to me, like as you got into the Iowa LSU Elite Eight game and the lead up to that, it sounded the discourse a lot more like it does for any of the men's sports that we normally talk about, where it was less about, oh, isn't it great that women's basketball is having this moment? It was, well, I'm a Caitlin Clark person. Well, I'm an Angel Reese person. So and it's funny because, when we talk about that stuff, like when it's JJ McCarthy versus Jalen Milroe in the Rose Bowl, we're like, the Milroe fans, but JJ McCarthy's a bum. Yeah. And so you get Caitlin Clark's a bum. I feel like, well, you can't say that about Caitlin.
Yeah, no. So my funny story about that game actually is I was there. I was there for the whole Sweet 16 Elite Eight, and I was supposed to leave the day before that game because my parents told me I had to get back for classes because I had missed too many classes. And I was like, okay, fine. Like I had accepted it. We didn't know it was going to be Iowa LSU.
Wait, before we say this, your parents said this. Yeah. Your dad is Jeff Goodman, who covers college basketball. Which is why I understand the job is more important.
I was able to convince him, but some of my classes have these like really strict attendance policies, and I'm taking French and such where they don't understand the caliber of game that Iowa LSU is, right? They don't get it. So I last minute, the day of the game, I think I called my dad crying and was like, I need to be here for this. Like, this is going to be like one of the biggest moments in women's basketball history. And if I'm not here for this, I will never forgive you. So they let me stay. I watched the game. It was one of the best, moments of my kind of young career here, getting to be in person for that.
And then South Carolina and Dawn Staley show that, hey, you can have a great player, right? A generationally great player, but that's hard to beat a great team when you have that much talent stacked around. And that's I'm fascinated by this. I want to get your take on this because I covered University of Tennessee for my first beat out of college, and this is Pat Summitt. She's not at the height of her powers anymore, but she's still really good. But Gino is dominating at UConn. And it felt at the time like, okay, is anybody else going to be able to do anything in this sport? Because you'd have the occasional good, like Muffet McGraw would have a good season at Notre Dame, or Tara Vanderveer would have a special team at Stanford. But could anybody else come in and dominate like that? Dawn Staley has, and it feels like she's doing it in a time that's even tougher to do it because the talent is spreading out more.
Yeah, no, she's incredible. What she does, like X's and O's wise, recruiting, like she just manages to get the right players in her team. Like it's not always, it's about best fit for her. It's not, you see the flashy name and you want them there. It's you find the best fit for your team, and look where that got her. An undefeated season, another national title. They're just incredible, and I think they have a real chance to do it again next year.
Well, and that, so we're going to watch that. I'm sure we'll have is South Carolina being this good bad for the sport debate like we did with UConn. But I'm curious, you wrote this on Wednesday about what's next. How do you capitalize on the post Caitlin Clark boom? And obviously, like Juju Watkins is a star at USC. But who are some of the other stars that we're going to see emerge over the next year or so that can kind of fill where Caitlin was, where Angel Reese was, where Cameron Brink was?
Yeah, well, I hate to go back to UConn, I know, but I think Paige
Paige is still there.
Yeah, I think she's going to be the biggest story next year. I think she'll, compete with Juju for that top spot in media coverage, just because of her story and the injuries she's had to face and what she's been going through and the real chance that they have to win a title next year. She's one. Then if you want to go, the younger players who are on the come up, obviously there's Hannah Hidalgo over at Notre Dame, who's incredible. I mean, led the country in steals last year, and it's just such a fun player to watch. And then Audie Crooks is another. She was a freshman last year, and she is just awesome. Like, she was my favorite player to watch last year, and she's so much fun, and she's only going to get better from here. And they have another, they have Addie Brown over there too, who's another great freshman. So there is not, a shortage of really, really exciting and fun players to watch in women's college basketball.
And a lot of these really good players have been moving in the transfer portal. We talked before we started recording, because in the men's game, you've seen some important players move, but you've also seen a lot more role player types. It feels like there have been quite a few players in the women's game that can change the team that they're going to's fortunes immediately when they get there. Who are some of the ones that will be the biggest impacts come next season?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lucy Olsen is definitely a big one. She was, third in scoring in the country, and at a good Villanova team who's historically really great, and coming to Iowa. And I know, you can't fill the Caitlin Clark shoes, right? You can't do it. But if you wanted someone to try, it would be her. It would definitely be her. And I think Haley Van Lith is another really interesting one. TCU is kind of loading up over there, and she was great at Louisville, went to LSU and struggled a little bit playing out of position. She wants to get back in position. So I think TCU will be a good spot for her and could really elevate TCU into a top 25 team, in my opinion, where they were not that without her.
Poor Haley Van Lith. I'm probably having nightmares about Kim Mulkey leaving her one-on-one on Caitlin Clark for the majority of that game. That was painful.
Yeah, she's a great player, though. It didn't showcase, she really is a great player and can make a choice on a team.
Well, and she was so good at Louisville, and it just seemed like she wasn't the right fit there. Well, and I'm curious, because we've seen this. We've seen this in pro free agency and in the transfer portal. Going to what you think is the best situation or trying to form the super team, and then you're not fitting the role you should be in.
Yeah, that was LSU in a nutshell last season. And so I think another situation that I don't think we'll end up like that, but Brenda Freese and Maryland have gotten an insane caliber of transfers this offseason. And so that's definitely something to look at. She's a phenomenal head coach, and she'll make it work with them. And they're not the level of stars that maybe LSU got last year, but there definitely is a danger to that, where, you have a bunch of these women coming in and they think, they're the best player on the court because they were where they came from, right? So it's definitely interesting. I think coaches have learned from the past few years as the portal has kind of escalated.
How much is realignment affecting that? We see it in football where they're gravitating toward the Big Ten and the SEC.
A lot.
Basketball, a little different, because obviously, on the men's side, the Big East is still considered very much a power conference. But in the women's game, is it similar to football, where the Big Ten and the SEC are kind of sucking up the oxygen?
It's you really see Oregon State struggling right now. That's the big one.
Yeah,
it's hard. Their best players are leaving. Reagan Beer is going to Oklahoma. Talia Van Olhoffen is going to USC and kind of joining their little super team that they have there now. But it's been really a tough offseason for them, and you feel for them because they were I saw them in the tournament this year. They were phenomenal, so much fun to watch, and they had so much potential, and realignment just kind of ruined it for them, which just sucks. But they're the big one that's being suffering. There are a few others for sure, but they're the big one.
Do you think Fox, Big Ten Network, that whole group takes advantage of having Juju Watkins and USC? I mean, that seems to be the team that we're going to get pushed into our feeds the most often next year.
I hope so, for sure. And another thing, I mentioned this in my story, but the Big East uses Flow Hoops a lot, and there's a team called UConn in the Big East, which we're but they also have Villanova, Creighton. There are great teams in the Big East. So I think accessibility is kind of the focal point of it for me, is making sure that these women are on TV, because people will enjoy them if they're on. It's just hard to see them sometimes. So I think they will take advantage of that. And
there was always this chicken egg argument about, if you covered it more, people will watch it more. And if you said, well, no, people aren't watching, which is why we're not covering it more. I don't think you can have that argument anymore, because I think what we saw last year is when the product is good,
yes,
people are going to watch.
Exactly. Just like any other sport.
Yeah. Were you surprised though? Like when you saw the numbers off the LSU Iowa Elite Eight game or the national championship game? I mean, those were huge,
Right.
huge numbers.
I had hoped they would be. I was surprised at the Elite Eight game. And then after that, I wasn't surprised at the title game because you saw like what the fans could really do. And obviously the matchups are a little bit different in the personalities clashing and all that, of course. But I wouldn't say I was surprised. I was very glad to see it. And I was hopeful that would happen. Maybe a little surprised at just the caliber of it. But
so I do have a question. So you are attacking this coverage in a different way than a lot of people who've covered women's basketball. Like you said, you're attacking it more of newsbreaker, very recruiting focused, very, a lot of the news in the portal, which is similar to the way we at On3 and the recruiting sites have covered college football and men's college basketball. How did you decide to do it that way? Because there wasn't anybody really doing that.
That is how I decided to do it. That there was no one doing it. I was looking for that information myself, just as a reporter. I was an Indiana women's basketball beat reporter because I go here, and I'm looking for information, right? I'm trying to find it during the off season. There's nothing. Like no one's breaking. There are some people getting into it now. Don't get me wrong, and there are some great people getting into it now. But there's really no like one source to follow for these kind of things, and so I was like, all right, if no one's doing it, I guess I will. Like, I guess I'll take that, right? And I love like the traditional kind of reporting too, as far as features and analysis goes. But I think it's really important to have a newsbreaker in women's basketball.
Well, and we are glad that we have you, because between you and Pete Nakos and Hayes Fawcett and Joe Tipton, we're going to have it all covered. Like if players are moving, we got it. And I'm so excited to see what you do here, and just want to say thank you for coming aboard, and hope you don't mind. We'll be bugging you quite a bit as we go forward, but welcome aboard.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, Talia Goodman, you are going to get to read a lot from her. You're going to see her a lot on this channel, and we are very, very excited. The vertical is called Her, and you'll be clicking on it. I guarantee it. That is Talia Goodman. Follow her and follow her, our new vertical at On3, where we're covering women's basketball. It is going to be a lot of fun, and that sports momentum is definitely surging right now. Like Talia said, there's a bunch of new stars waiting in the wings. If you haven't seen Juju Watkins yet, just wait. She's a lot of fun. Plays for USC. All right, let us get to Deion. A lot of comments already in the chat about Deion Sanders. I got a lot of questions about Deion Sanders. Antoine in the chat. You really woke up this morning to talk about someone's family, because the headline is, has the Sanders family made a heel turn at Colorado? Because we're not just talking about Deion. We're talking about Shedeur and Shiloh, who have been involved in this as well. On3 is weird for this, bruh. I'll get to it. But I'm not sure you guys understand the concept of shows. Like, we talk about things that people are interested in. People are interested in Colorado. Bradley in the chat. On3 just hates Prime because he's black. There's no other explanation to hate on someone so much. No, we talk about him because he's interesting. Guess who we talked about for most of last year? Jim Harbaugh. Very interesting. Also very white. Guess who we talk about all the time? Ryan Day. Can he ever beat Michigan? It's not always in the most positive light. It's interesting. Craig in the chat. He's probably the most polarizing person in sports, possibly. Some hate his brashness and cockiness. He'll be just fine. He's the best corner ever. He is the most, well, he's not the most polarizing person, but he is a polarizing person. And that's interesting. So let's get to the questions about Deion Sanders and about Colorado. We'll start with one that Nathan sent in.
Dear Andy, I feel like with the sudden shift of perception of Coach Prime, it's from, savant to villain. I feel like this is a good time to ask the question of what should be acceptable interpersonal behavior for a college football coach. I remember last year, around this time when Deion was hired and he got rid of all the players, and some of us were saying, "Oh, that's kind of a dick move," but I know that other people, a lot of the talking heads, were saying, "Well, it doesn't really matter. This happens. All that really matters is winning games." And then Deion went on and said that ridiculous thing about wanting a quarterback with 2 parents and linemen who only have 1. And some of us were like, wow, that's a really insensitive and terrible thing to say and probably stupid. And yet there were a lot of talking heads who were like, oh, no, that's totally just something that coaches think already. And all that really matters is winning games. Well, one, I mean, Deion hasn't shown that he can win games yet. But also, can we have a serious conversation about what a coach should be allowed to say, what a coach should be allowed to do, and how he should be allowed to treat students? Because, yeah, we can talk about them getting paid, but at the end of the day, they are students. And even if you are the boss of a Fortune 500 company, if you treat your employees like junk, no one's going to like you. And, there's a good chance your employees aren't going to work as well for you as they would otherwise. I feel like this is a really important discussion that a lot of people are just not having. So how should a coach actually act in 2024? What is off the table and what is acceptable?
All right, that is a good question from Nathan at the end. What's acceptable? How are you? Because this is where this particular version of the Deion discourse has bubbled up. Max Olson in The Athletic writes a story where he tracked down where everybody went after the roster purge last year. And he talked to some of the players who got cut. Some of those players did not have very nice things to say about how they were treated at Colorado, which is not surprising because they were essentially told they're not good enough. People don't like that. Now, I have a little different opinion on Deion cutting players than I think a lot of people do. My opinion on Deion cutting players is fine. Cut whoever you want. Make the roster what you want it to be. You're hired to win games. You took over a 1-11 team. You need to cut players. You need to make the roster better. And I think we can all safely agree he did. Shedeur, Travis Hunter, Shiloh, those are better players than what Colorado had. Now, how he went about it, you can disagree with. Them clapping back this week at the guys who were mad, they don't have to do that. But again, they can do it. That's why I asked, is he making a heel turn? Because this is wrestling heel behavior, which don't get that confused. That's not like real villain behavior. It's cartoon villain behavior. It's this is for show. This is for the entertainment value of it. And the thing is, Deion Sanders is very entertaining. That is why we're here. That is why we keep talking about him. Bradley in the chat, I only clicked on this video because it said Colorado, so technically Colorado gets on 3 views, so they should be happy. I am happy. Again, I don't think you guys understand how this works. He's interesting. You're interested in him. We talk about him. And that's the whole point here. A lot of the complaints about Max's story have been, well, other schools do this too. Look at all the guys in the portal. And you're right. Other schools have had roster purges. In fact, while not as extreme as the one in year 1 for Deion at Colorado, there were some that were pretty close. Like Arizona State was very close. Well, guess what? You want to know why we talked a lot more about Colorado's roster purge than Arizona State's? Because you hired Deion Sanders. He's interesting. I love Kenny Dillingham, the new Arizona State coach. Nice guy. Really fun. Can do the worm. It's great. He's not Deion Sanders. We're not going to talk about him as much as we talk about Deion Sanders. He wasn't the greatest cornerback of all time. He wasn't one of the greatest personalities who's ever been in sports. When Colorado hired Deion Sanders, it said, look at us. It hired Deion Sanders for the attention that he would bring. Well, guess what? You got what you wanted, but you don't get to dictate how that attention gets focused or how everybody feels. And you see that a lot with places that aren't used to getting attention, that then get it, and they wanted it, but they don't understand how attention works. Like you really don't get to dictate the terms of it. What they want is, oh, he's got Lil Wayne leading him out of the tunnel. Oh, Warren Sapp's out for the D-line. Oh, it's so amazing. What you're getting is that, which was fun, by the way. That whole Colorado State game day was amazing. But you're also getting a somewhat critical look at roster management, roster construction. You're getting people who go, okay, and then I think I fall into this boat. Year one, I get the whole roster purge. I get cutting everybody. All of this makes perfect sense. But when you do the same thing again in year two, then I start to wonder. Then I start to wonder if there's a long-term plan. When you're not doing in-home visits, when you're not doing in-school visits, you're not doing the things that other coaches are doing to secure talent. I start to wonder if there's a long-term plan. When what you're getting out of the portal, because we have eyes and we talk to coaches and we know who everybody wants in the portal and who everybody's kind of indifferent to. And most of the guys you're getting out of the portal are not the ones that everybody else wants. And we're not super optimistic about what you're going to be in year two relative to what you were in year one. Yeah, you're going to get criticized. You're going to get people saying, I don't think this is going to work long term. I'm not sure you know what you're doing. And maybe Deion will prove us wrong on that front. Maybe they will have an incredible season this year. They'll win a bunch of games. And we'll be wrong. And I'll be the first to come on and say, I messed up. I was wrong. Deion had a better plan than I thought he had. I don't think I'm going to have to say that, though. Because I saw what you brought in from the portal. Dave in the chat says, look at me, but don't look at the warts. See, but here's the thing about the Deion Sanders part of it. I don't think Deion is controlling how we look at him. I don't think he's seeking out the attention as much as people think he is. We just gravitate to him. There are certain people that we do that to. And sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. With Deion, it makes perfect sense because he has this magnetic personality. He was the greatest cornerback of all time. Like, if you watch Deion play at Florida State and then for the Cowboys and the Falcons and the 49ers, like, he was electrifying on the field. And then he had the personality on TV afterwards. He is a magnetic person that people want to watch and people want to talk about. Like, Tim Tebow was like that, but didn't have anywhere near the accomplishments in the NFL. He was a good college player, but he was a polarizing figure where you could just build an entire debate show around him. And they did over and over and over again. Deion, I would argue, is actually a better person for that because he's more interesting. He's more accomplished. But that's why you hired him. You hired him so we'd talk about him. So we talk about Colorado. And I think, like the people at Ohio State, the people at Alabama, they get talked about all the time. They get this. They're used to this because while their fans say very nice things about them all the time, and while we say objectively nice things about them when they're doing well, we're also very hard on them when they don't. Like unreasonably hard. I think about every time Nick Saban would get up at SEC Media Days in a year after one where they didn't win the national championship. The whole next week was us saying, look at Nick Saban making all these excuses. When the guy had probably gone 11-1 the previous season. Like, that's what we do. That's the job. We talk about sports. You like talking about sports. That's why we're here. But it's truly amazing every time when somebody hires somebody to get attention and then they get mad that they got attention. But that's where we're at right now. All right, we got a couple other Deion questions. Well, one's a Shedeur question. This one's from Steven. Will the Shedeur Sanders tweet hurt him in the long run? And let's put up the tweet. This is Shedeur Sanders tweeting in response to that same athletic story. And the quotes from one particular player, Xavier Smith, who wound up transferring to Austin Peay, who since followed Scotty Walden to UTEP. And Shedeur says, I don't even remember him. Bro had to be very mid at best. Again, you don't have to say this. You chose to say this. Is it going to hurt him for awards? No, I don't think so. If Shedeur Sanders has a great season, he's going to win awards. Is it going to hurt him in the draft? Probably not. Look, they'll tell you any reason that you can find some unnamed scout that's going to rip somebody. I'm sure there will be plenty of unnamed scouts who will rip Shedeur Sanders just like they've ripped all these other quarterbacks. But I don't think it's really going to hurt him. Like, I noticed this week everybody's complaining because some NFL folks said that the Spencer Rattler performance on QB1 when he was in high school, that hurt his draft. No, Spencer Rattler's college performance hurt Spencer Rattler's draft stock. If they thought Spencer Rattler was great, they would have drafted him in the first round. Trust me, they were drafting QBs in the first round. Michael Penix Jr. went in the top 10. Bo Nix went number 12. Those are guys that you would not expect to get drafted in the first round. So if they thought Spencer Rattler was that great, they would have picked him in the first round. I don't think his performance on the show changed that. And that was a long time ago. And I guarantee you there were plenty of people at South Carolina who said, hey, you get to know this guy. He's not that guy. I don't think that's what affected it. I don't think a tweet is going to affect Shedeur Sanders' draft stock. How Shedeur Sanders plays on the field will affect Shedeur Sanders' draft stock. Now, the question is he going to play as well as he can? Is he going to be upright? Shedeur Sanders got sacked a ton last year. They're now moving to an offense that's going to require the offensive line to give him even more time. I just don't know if that's going to happen. That is the bigger issue. All of this stuff does come back to what happens on the field. One more question on this topic before we move on. This is from Ryan. Dear Andy, how long does Deion last at Colorado? Seems like his last roster building, taking only a few high school players, really purging his roster, taking more transfers in consecutive years, and culture, just from what's going on at X.com, are not working, and this thing is going off the rails quickly. Before we thought Deion might hop out of Colorado quickly because he'd have another bigger opportunity. Now, I'd be shocked if he's a Power 4 coach anywhere in 2026. What do you think? I'd be a little shocked too. Because, again, it goes back to the roster construction piece of it. He does not seem to be building for the long term. Now, he has started to fill the class of 2025. When we talked about this last time, he had not gotten any commitments in the class of 2025 yet. Now, he's got 3. So that's good. He's starting to get with that. But they don't seem to be doing anything that builds any sort of foundation for the future. It seems to be built around the players he brought from Jackson State, the really good ones, Shedeur and Travis Hunter specifically. And then we'll see what happens. But going so deep into when he went deep into the transfer portal last year, he was taking guys that had a lot of eligibility remaining. I thought, okay, he's going to take those guys, and that's really what Lane Kiffin did at Ole Miss. Use that to jumpstart things, but they've got eligibility, so you can develop and build with them. But they've had so much outflow followed by inflow this year that you're not actually developing those guys. You looked at who you had, and you're like, these guys aren't good enough either. We'll get these other guys. But the relative quality of what they're getting is basically the same. So at a certain point, you got to stop and try to make the players better. Or you're not going to have a long-term future. You're just going to have the same season over and over and over again. And that's the thing. Now, as far as is it going off the rails, I don't know if it's going off the rails. We don't know that. It's the off season. We will know when the season starts. They played North Dakota State, Nebraska, Colorado State, and then they're into the Big 12 schedule. We'll know when they're playing games what this means. Now, we got a little bit of fool's gold last year because TCU was coming off a national title game appearance. Colorado goes in there and beats them, and we think, oh boy, Colorado's a lot better than we thought. Well, TCU turns out wasn't very good last year. Nebraska was a 5-17. They lost to Colorado. Horrible turnover game. Played terribly. Colorado barely beat Colorado State, which wasn't a very good team. That was the Lil Wayne day. That was the day that they got 10 million people to watch a Colorado State game that started at 10:30 on the East Coast. That was the day that showed us the power of Prime as a salesman. But it did not show us the power of Prime as a power conference football coach because they barely beat Colorado State. And then you saw the rest of the year how it went. They have to be better than that. If they're not, then this goes downhill very quickly. And I'm not sure Deion's going to want to deal with that. So it's really going to be up to him because I think as long as he's at Colorado, they're going to be getting more attention than they did. They're probably going to be able to recruit better than they could with somebody else. Probably. But again, if you're not willing to do the things that other coaches are doing, like I look at let's look at first-year coaches this year, like Fran Brown. We've had him on the show, the new coach at Syracuse. That guy inherited a better team than Deion inherited Colorado last year. So the expectations are higher for Fran Brown in year one, but he has definitely improved the roster. But he's also very hard at work trying to build for 25, 26. Like he's very much doing it the way that he learned to do it from Kirby Smart, from Greg Schiano, from the guys that he's worked with before. And, you guys can tell me that, well, Coach Prime's different, and he is different. He can get indoors that nobody else can get into, but he's not using that to his advantage. He's not playing 40 chess. Go Buck says, Deion been on the job 17 months. You think teams built their foundation without a collective in 17 months? Laugh out loud. Well, nobody had a collective before 2021. And if you're going to cry poor, well, guess what? That's why you hired Deion. He's the only person maybe who can give you a discount. Nick Saban got you a discount. Nick Saban's done. So if you think it's because you don't have enough money, go raise some more. But that also means you could have anybody coaching your team if you have enough money. So what's the difference? Go Bucks again. Prime has been winning his entire life. Prime didn't need to go to Colorado to build a brand. Nobody's saying he did. His brand's great. That's why Colorado hired him. They hired him because he'd already built his brand. But that's not the question. The job is to be a good coach at Colorado. And right now he's 4-8. So if he flips that number around this year, we're not having this discussion next year. If he does exactly the same thing, I don't even know if he's there. I'm not saying they're going to fire him. He just may say to hell with this. So yeah, I wouldn't be shocked. If Deion's not at a power conference school in 2026, I wouldn't be shocked. If he does give it another year after Shedeur and Travis leave, okay. But nothing he's doing right now suggests he's building for the long term. So I apologize to the Colorado fans who are mad because we're talking about Colorado. But again, that's why you hired Deion Sanders. Congratulations. You got what you wanted. Now quit whining about it. All right, next question. This one's from Alec. And I'm glad he asked this because I probably needed to sit down and explain this, and I probably needed to make this list. Hi, Andy. You often talk about coaches at certain schools being hired to, quote unquote, win the national championship. How many of these schools are there, and who are they? All right, let's qualify this first. When I say that your job is to win the national championship at a certain school, I do not mean I think you're going to win it this year or that you even can win it this year. I mean, your fan base thinks that the only two acceptable trajectories while you are coaching this team are getting better so that you can eventually win the national championship or in contention for the national championship. Those are the only two acceptable trajectories. You are not allowed to do anything else or have any other kind of year. There are definitely schools like that where the fan base feels that way, where the program is certainly not in a place where it is on a trajectory to eventually compete for national titles or where it's in contention for national titles. And we'll talk about those in a second. It's more about that fan expectation and, in a way, administrative expectation, because if the administration, one, feels that way, or two, allows the fans to sway it to make a more rash decision or to demand more success sooner than probably is reasonable, then you have the same problem. So I made a list, and the one I was talking about a few years ago the most was Auburn. When Brian Harsin was at Auburn and you watched his recruiting, I kept saying over and over, does he understand what his job is? Does he understand that his job is to win the national title at Auburn? Because he was not recruiting like a person whose job is to win the national title. Like, to do that, you have to go head to head with Georgia, with Alabama, with Ohio State for players. You've got to make players who would have gone to those places come to your school. That's the only way you can do the job correctly. And he wasn't doing that. And I wasn't sure he understood that because it seemed like a conscious decision. Like, I'll give you another example. Billy Napier at Florida. Florida is one of these schools. Is Florida in a position to win the national title? Of course not. Are they on a trajectory where they're coming closer to winning a national title? I don't think so. I don't think they're doing that either. I do think Billy Napier understands the expectation, though. Like, he understands the job is to win the national title. He's just not doing the job as well as he needs to keep it. So let's list those schools. Here are the ones that are definitely in that category: Auburn, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. I would not have put Michigan on this list before they cut Jim Harbaugh's pay a few years ago. But when they did, it was like, okay, yeah, you're going to be cutthroat too. So you're on this list. LSU, absolutely on this list. The last three coaches before Brian Kelly won the national title. Brian Kelly is expected to win the national title. No ifs, ands, or buts. Texas is on this list. Texas A&M, despite not winning a national title since 1939, is on this list because that is what is expected. This fan base says, hey, we have all the resources, we have the location, we have all of the pieces in place that should allow us to compete for national titles. We just don't. But A&M's done this before. This multiple years. I mean, this goes back decades. When they hired Jackie Sherrill in the 80s, this was Texas A&M saying, we should be competing for national championships. What the hell's going on here? They're not changing. That's going to still be the expectation and the demand. Florida, I just mentioned them. Now, you can argue that Florida's expectations have caused the coaching churn to go faster than it should have. I don't know if that's the case. I just know they know what they want. Now, perhaps because they've gone so long without sustained success, those expectations are dropping a little bit. But I don't think they're dropping that much. Florida State's another one I'd put on this list. A few years ago, I might not have. But now that Mike Norvell's got them back where they're very good, you remember, they're only 11 years removed from a national title. They were recruiting among the best teams in the country for a long time. I do think the expectation among the Florida State fan base is you're supposed to win a national title here. And I think if you look at what's happened, it's not unreasonable. Obviously, Bobby Bowden was one of the greatest of all time, but Jimbo Fisher won one. Mike Norvell just had a 13-0 season in an ACC championship. Now, they didn't get to play for the national title because they were left out of the playoff. That wouldn't happen this year. They're going to be in the playoff if they're in that position again, so they can prove it. But I do think that expectation, that fan base says, yeah, we're among the best in the country. We should be playing for national titles. Now, I've got a few with question marks. All of those, I think, are the definites, where if you were to interview for, let's say your job opens up, like Alabama's opened up, and a candidate said to the AD, can you give me a one-sentence job description? The AD should just say your job's to win the national title. All of those I just listed, that's what the AD should say. Whether it's true or not, whether it's something that can actually happen or not, is irrelevant. It's what is expected. Here's some that I am curious what you guys think, because I'm a little on the fence. Notre Dame. I don't feel like the Notre Dame administration is putting that much pressure on a coach to win the national title. I don't really feel like the Notre Dame fan base necessarily is either. I feel like they are fairly realistic. They understand that the way Notre Dame handles academics, that it fishes from a little bit smaller pool than a lot of the national title contenders do in recruiting. So I feel like there's a little more reasonable approach to this. But then I see some quotes that some Notre Dame fans sent me when we talked about this in another way. And I said Notre Dame, doesn't feel like they absolutely need a national title. It was an answer to a Dear Andy question, which programs need a national title. And Notre Dame fans are sending me quotes from Pete Bavacqua, the new AD, basically saying, we need to win a national title in football. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, if you say so. So we probably should put them on this list too. If that's what the guy in charge is saying, we should probably believe him. Clemson. Pre-Dabo, I don't think Clemson fans expected national titles. I do think they expected a better team than they were frequently getting, but I don't think they expected national titles. Dabo gave them national titles. I think as long as Dabo's there, they expect a really good team. I don't get the sense that they're completely unreasonable. And I also, look, if they were like some of these other programs on this list, they would be agitating right now. They would be like, I don't know if Dabo's going to make it. And I don't get that sense from them. I still think there's a great appreciation for what Dabo Swinney's done. There's a great love of Dabo Swinney at Clemson. And if you were that cutthroat, like some of these other fan bases I was talking about, the discourse would be completely different right now. So I don't think Clemson belongs on that list. Penn State. This is a really interesting one. And I kind of feel like we need to get Sean Fitz from Blue and White Illustrated on and ask him this question. Get people who are a little more attuned with the program, because from the outside, it seems like they're perfectly okay with not being in that echelon of national championship contenders, at least from an administrative standpoint. I think a lot of the fan base would like them to be a little more high pressured, would like them to say, no, we do demand more. We want more than this. But I don't know that they necessarily get that from the administration. Now, part of it is Pat Kraft, the AD, got the job after James Franklin had been signed to this most recent extension. And James Franklin's extension came at the time people were handing out huge extensions because USC was open and LSU was open. And so even if you were supremely unhappy, there's not much you could do about it. So I don't know, again, where Penn State falls in this. It might just be circumstantial. But I don't get the sense that that's a place where the fan base or the administration said, we are going to run you out if you don't start getting closer to national titles. But I may be wrong on that. I'm curious if there are any Penn State fans in the chat. Let me know. How do you feel about that? What would you want? What's realistic? And I guess it doesn't even have to be realistic because we talk about like Auburn and Florida, which right now, national title contention isn't realistic, but those fan bases expect their coaches to get them back there. So like Hugh Freeze just got to Auburn. Obviously, they're not expecting him to win the national title this year, but they are expecting him to make significant progress toward getting into the realm of contention. A couple more question mark schools I had, and I'm definitely not sure on these either. USC. So USC's administration was incredibly patient with Clay Helton. So patient that you think, okay, maybe they're not that serious about this. Now, they've since overhauled the administration as well. And that's when they hired Lincoln Riley. So it may be that they're in a different mode right now. And I think given the way things have gone since Riley got there, the push to, I think Riley got pushed from above to fire Alex Grinch. It might not have been something he necessarily wanted to do, but the administration worked to make that happen. I think USC may be on this list, may belong on this list. I don't know, though. That's one I would like to talk to somebody who's a little closer to it to get an understanding of where they are. But I think they belong on this list, whereas maybe Penn State or Clemson, I wouldn't put on the list. And the other one is a school that I think if they get a little better, they definitely go on this list, is Tennessee. I think Tennessee walked through the wilderness for so long that their fan base got a little bit reasonable, which I can't believe I'm even saying that about my friends from Vol Twitter, because those guys are about the least reasonable people you'll ever meet. But I do think they were dealing with frustration and just spinning wheels for so long that they got their expectations kind of leveled out. But I do think another good year or two from Josh Heupel, and they'll be right back where we're on the level of crazy with Florida, with Auburn, with Texas A&M, where it's like, no, you better be winning a national title. I don't think they're there right now, but I do think one or two more good years, and they're absolutely on the list. So, Alec, that is the list. If there's one I missed, please let me know. I don't think there is. And again, I don't think, like especially Texas A&M, Auburn, Florida, I don't think they're going to win a national title or that they should win a national title right now. I don't think they're in position. But I'm telling you right now, their fans think their coach's job is to win the national title, and that makes things very tough if you're the coach. The hill you have to climb is very steep. And so the A&M and Auburn have recently made changes. Billy Napier, we'll see what happens to him at Florida. If they make a change, it will be steep for the next guy. Just like it was steep for Billy Napier. And that's kind of where the debate comes in. But I'm not here to tell you what you do or don't want. And I've said that multiple times when Brian Harsin got fired at Auburn, when Jimbo got fired at Texas A&M, when Dan Mullen got fired at Florida. Like, I'm not going to tell you what you do or don't want. You want what you want. Those places, they won national titles. Whether it's realistic or not is irrelevant. So that's the job description. All right, another one from Dominic. NIL is great, and so is the ability of players to transfer for better fits for them, although it is getting a bit out of hand in some cases. The fact the athletes are finally able to free themselves the same way a coach can is a step in the right direction. With Virginia making a state law allowing players to receive money directly from schools, I had a different suggestion. And a long email from Dominic, but basically his suggestion is when a power conference school takes from a group of 5 school, that once you have, let's say, if the athletes are employees or if they're, independent contractors that are being paid directly by the schools, you would have essentially what amounts to like a transfer fee, much like you have in international soccer, where the club taking the player pays the club that had the player. And it would go from school to school. And what Dominic is saying is this would help keep the group of 5 schools going. It would allow them to take some of that money, or that money to flow down into the group of 5 from the power conferences. It's actually not a bad idea. I think I've thrown it out before here. The idea of the transfer fees. Now, what it would require is for the group of 5 to essentially form its own subdivision and be its own thing, which is sort of what we talked about earlier in the week, where this idea of a group of 5 playoff where they would play for their own national championship. Essentially, they'd be a different subdivision, but they could still play the power conference schools in the regular season. That's why it's getting traction. Not because of the transfer fee idea, but it is a better idea today than it was, say, 5 years ago, when they could just get some free money from the college football playoff, didn't really have to do anything for it, but didn't really have any other option. Now they might. And if we're going to look at the players as commodities, and I'll push back on Nathan and his Deion Sanders question, where he's saying these are students. No, they're not really. They're getting paid now. It's not the same thing. The relationship's not the same. So if we're looking at them as commodities, you could conceivably say, okay, here's our top level. We agree that all of these schools are on the same level. And if players move between those, that's fine. And they can drop down if they want. But if you're going to bring a player up a level, if you're going to take advantage of the development that was done at the group of 5 level, they unearthed the player, they helped develop him, made him good, and you think he's going to help you, then you should pay them for that. I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. It's veering toward trades, which I don't think you're going to get in college football. But hey, stranger things have happened. Like if you get into a situation where there's a collective bargaining agreement and contracts and employment, all of that may be on the table. But the transfer fee thing makes sense if you wanted to do it that way. And it could be a bone that the power conference schools throw the group of 5 type schools, where, yeah, instead of complaining about being a farm system, embrace it. Profit off of it. I don't know if it's profit. Most of the schools probably aren't turning a profit, but increase your revenue with it. I don't know if it increases your net or if it nets out positively at that point, but you couldn't increase your revenue. Next question comes from Wally. In a hypothetical world where every school is unaffiliated and 4 new conferences were drafting members, how many schools would they take before they felt they hit the balance of inventory and program value and stopped drafting? This is a good question. This is if the conferences weren't already composed the way they're composed, because I get this question in a different way a lot. And it is, when are the Big Ten and the SEC going to drop the schools that are traditionally not very good at football and just go with the better lineup? They're not. Short answer. They're not. They're not dropping anybody. They're going to hope that the increased revenue, because their lineups are better, will make those schools better than their Big 12 equivalents or their ACC equivalents. But they're not going to drop them. So what Wally's asking is how many schools would it really be? And I think that the question is who's running the draft, like who's pulling the strings. So we know right now that Fox makes a lot of the decisions for the Big Ten. We know that the SEC and the ACC, obviously very much in league with ESPN. They have all of their deal with ESPN. So if the TV executives were doing it, I suspect that number would be about 40. And I remember when I did that 4018 Super League project a few months ago, that's about where you start to say all of these past a certain point kind of look the same. Now, I did 48, and that included everybody who's currently in the Big Ten and the SEC, because, again, they're not going to get rid of anybody. But if you didn't have to deal with that, I do think the number probably is around 40, because at that point, you're going to get a bunch of schools where the pro and con list looks basically the same for all of them. And I think that's where you draw the line. So I'd say it's 40. I'd say if the people at the schools, the athletic departments, the athletic directors, the coaches, if they would want a bigger ecosystem, because that's what we grew up with. That's what we're used to. And I think they would want probably closer to 70. I think that would be more fun. But unfortunately, I'm not a TV executive, and that's the problem. They're the ones that are going to probably ultimately make these decisions when they get made. But yeah, I would say 40 is the number, very similar to the current SEC and Big Ten. And you know which schools we're talking about. You'd pull out, but then you'd throw Notre Dame in there. You'd throw Florida State, Clemson in there. You'd throw some of the Big 12 schools in there, and you'd have your number. But it's not going to be that clean. I mean, that would be pretty cutthroat too. But I do think that what will really happen is going to be pretty cutthroat too. All right, next question from Trevor. As a Bama fan, I'm still recovering from Coach Saban's retirement. Hated to see that run in. Lots of folks have voiced an opinion on why this was the year. I've seen stories that the game had passed him by, that he can't handle NIL, the transfer portal. However, I've not seen a single story mentioning that Dodge ended Charger production in December 2023. That can't be a coincidence. Am I right? Everybody in SEC country is laughing. If you don't know what this means, the player parking lot at Alabama for a long time was loaded with Dodge Chargers. And that led to a lot of accusations that was a particular gift that you got when you came to Alabama. Now, what this ignored is a lot of player parking lots everywhere were loaded with Dodge Chargers, because Dodge Chargers are an insanely popular fleet vehicle. There's a huge supply of them, dwindling now because they're not making them anymore. But there was always a big supply of them available, gently used at a very good price. And they are highly customizable. Tons of aftermarket stuff you can buy for those, and very easy to customize, make your own, make it look cool. I think the difference now, like the biggest difference in the NIL era has been which model of Charger the players drive. Like before, most of the players were driving Chargers that they had customized. They'd made the interior look good, but they didn't have the Hellcat engine in them. Now they got NIL money, maybe have a deal with a Dodge dealership, and they got that Hellcat engine. That's pretty much the difference. But yeah, it's funny because that was the running joke about Alabama is, oh, you get a Dodge Charger when you sign with Alabama. No, but if you were at any school in the pre-NIL days where there might have been a duffel bag dropped, you may have used some of the cash from the duffel bag to buy a Dodge Charger, gently used, of course. You may have customized it. But now, I will say, Trevor, all's not lost. They are coming out with an electric Charger. I think the higher end one, the Scat Pack model, is like 671 horsepower. So have no fear. the Charger as an aspirational vehicle is coming back. Does that mean Nick Saban comes back to football? I doubt it. It's pretty good on TV. All right, one more question. This one's from Caleb. I think I've answered this one before, but I actually think my answer might be changing. Which group of 5 team will you be rebuilding in the new college football video game? Yeah, we've talked about this before. Tulane would be fun. San Jose State, Appalachian State. I had settled, I thought, on Georgia Southern. Like, I'd love to get Statesboro rocking, bring national titles to Statesboro. I might bring the triple option back. I do love that Irk Russell, get after their asses, that whole ethos at Georgia Southern. I'm all for that. And I like that Clay Helton's made it fun and they fling it around now. There's a lot of, it's not the same thing, but it's still fun. And that's a place where they really appreciate football. And I feel like even if I brought Georgia Southern some fictional video game national titles, I'd at least probably get like free coffee in Statesboro for that. So I feel like that would be the way to do it. But, Andrew says Kennesaw State. Those Owls. Goat Dog says triple option in 2024 is a war crime. Goat Dog, no. UNLV with the go-go offense, which is triple option-based run game. Went to the Mountain West title game last year. Didn't you watch Brennan Marion on the show the other day? Goat Dog says ECU, baby. There we go. Here's my question. Do I get free Bees barbecue in Greenville, North Carolina, if I bring ECU multiple video game national titles? Because I'm willing to be bought. That is a place, much like Statesboro, Georgia, Greenville, North Carolina, is a place where they really appreciate their football. I did have one other thought, though. And I'm going back to watching that, thinking back to the first week last season, I'm watching that Wyoming-Texas Tech game in Laramie. And I'm like, oh, good Lord. What a place this is. Those Wyoming uniforms, brown and yellow, with the bucking bronco on the helmet, the cowboy up here on the helmet. 7,215 feet above sea level in Laramie. I think I might be the Wyoming Cowboys coach / GM / athletic director. I got another couple months to figure it out. But I definitely think Wyoming is a finalist. So right now, Wyoming, Georgia Southern, East Carolina. Oh, Crunch Time Advantage says, let's take over South Alabama. Well, I think Major Applewhite's got it under control there. He's replacing Kane Womack, who's now the DC at Alabama. But yeah, we could do USA. Beautiful, beautiful new facilities. Their stadium's awesome. That's where they hold the Senior Bowl practices. South Alabama is another good choice. Most of the Sun Belt is a good choice. Let's be perfectly honest here. Places that definitely appreciate football, that again probably give you some swag just for winning fictional video game national titles. So I think I'm gonna do this. Like maybe I call Hayes Fawcett and get a graphic, like my 5 finalists for the team I'm gonna take over. And then I'll announce my commitment right after EA Sports officially reannounces the game and the specifics of when it's coming out, how it's going to look. Because I need a few more details. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. And again, I'm willing to be bribed. So the fine businesses of Greenville, North Carolina, of Mobile, of Laramie, Wyoming, of Statesboro, Georgia, of Boone, North Carolina, let me know. Let me know what I get for leading you to national titles. And then I will lead you to national titles. Great Dear Andy questions today. Fantastic. Always love when we can talk Coach Prime because people watch when we talk Coach Prime. Colorado fans may not like it if we're not completely super ecstatic and positive about everything Coach Prime related. But yeah, you guys really are you like talking about Coach Prime. I like it too, because I think he's endlessly interesting. Like, we've had topics on this show that I know everybody wants to talk about, but we've beat them into the ground. They cease to be interesting, and we have to talk about them anyway because it's what everybody wants to talk about. I don't get that with Colorado and Deion Sanders. I feel like it remains interesting. I still feel like it's a bit of an experiment, the way he's handling the roster, and I'm fascinated to see how it ends, because I do think we'll have an idea based on what they do this year about what the ultimate result is. But we've got 4 more months before we find out anything tangible, which means we have a lot to talk about. And listen, you got Deion retweeting people, taking aim at the haters. You got Shador hosting spaces on Twitter. They keep feeding the content machine too. And for that, we salute them. We'll talk to you tomorrow. We'll update on Texas A&M. Been quiet in College Station. Remember, that was one of the places I said where the job is to win the national title? Mike Elko's job now is to win the national title. He ain't going to win it this year. But can he get them on the right trajectory? We'll talk to Billy Lucci from TexAgs.com tomorrow about the Aggies. We'll talk to you tomorrow.